investigate the usability of a biological organism for conducting a biological operation. In layman's term, germ warfare. The laboratory at that time, though, was full of Iraqi microbiologists. You see, we were training Iraq. See, at that time, Iraq was our ally. And they had, you remember, Iran kicked their butts out. When Iran kicked their butts out, we went in with the there was no really effective way to fight it. Then by the mid-60s that we realized that germ warfare was very viable. It's an extremely effective form of warfare. We suddenly realized that any country that has got a small laboratory can very easily get into the germ warfare business. So we started a demonization program. They came out and they co-sponsored, the government did, several movies. The Andromeda Strain, the Omega Man, the virus. This was designed to scare the people into signing this treaty in 1972, banning all form of germ warfare. We signed that treaty, but that treaty was between governments. It was not between individual private corporations within that government, within that country. And so when I got out in '72 and started going to Ohio State University, I was still working in the MK9 project, again under a private corporation. And so when I was working my way through the laboratory, graduated in '76, went to work for a private corporation. Worked there from '76, it was Roche Biomedical, up until '84. But then a recruiter came and pecked me on the shoulder. A recruiter said, "Hey, Mr. Harris, this is line is your paycheck. This is a multiplication sign. This is 2. Are you interested?" Good approach. I took the approach, and I went to work for an outfit known as Cabazon Whack and Hunt. Cabazon Whack and Hunt, again, it was a reference laboratory located way the heck out in the middle of nowhere, a little bitty place called Coshocton, Ohio. I mean, just nothing out there. And so when I got to the laboratory, I drove by it 3 times and missed it. There's one little turnoff there and it said Agricultural Research Station. When I went out there, there was a bunch of Quonset huts in a row, all rusty, decrepit looking. But when I drove up to it, I found out that it had all been painted on. They were brand new. The rust and decrepit, all this stuff had been painted. It was camouflaged. So when I got there, this was 1985, we started training. When I went into the laboratory, our job was a reference laboratory that we were to investigate possible biological warfare agents that may have been used somewhere in the world. We were also to investigate the usability of a biological organism for conducting a biological operation. In layman's term, germ warfare. The laboratory at that time, though, was full of Iraqi microbiologists. You see, we were training Iraq. See, at that time, Iraq was our ally. And they had, you remember, Iran kicked their butts out. When Iran kicked their butts out, we went in with Iraq, got in with Saddam Hussein, and started, orchestrated a war between Iraq and Iran. But understand, Iraq has only got about 16 to 20 million people. That war was absolutely wearing them into the ground. So we started providing Saddam Hussein with materials for making ink pens. Ink pens, why? The main ingredient in ink that you have in a ballpoint pen is only 2 moves from nerve gas. So we started providing him materials to make nerve gas. We then started providing him with all the materials. You understand or wonder where Saddam Hussein got all of his biological weapons from? The biological weapons obtained by Saddam Hussein was obtained from the United States, and under the records available from a commercial or a federal investigation, 1980, of the materials sold to Saddam Hussein, the United States armed Iraq with biological agents. I can give you the date that we sold anthrax, plague, cholera,
typhoid, Frenzenella tularemia, botulism perfringens, all the biological agents we sold here, that even from congressional records, we sold them to Saddam Hussein. Gave it to him. We had an operation going down in Texas known as Tanex Corporation, rumored to be owned by George Bush and James Baker III, that owned Tanex, that provided Saddam Hussein with the nutrient medias, the nutrient broths. We had the corporations, the American Type Culture Collection out of Rockville, Maryland, that provided Saddam Hussein with all the biological agents. We had another operation out of Texas that works in gene splicing, that works with specialized organisms, and we sold to Saddam Hussein. But in that laboratory, we were training Iraqi microbiologists. All of the Middle Eastern scientists were trained in our laboratories. The problem is, even then, I was very concerned about training these people. I said, what if they turn on us? My thing was, they are our friends. They are our friends. They will not turn on us. So what happened was, during this time, as I was doing research on how to defend against germ warfare, I tell people, defending in germ warfare is hard. Learning how to conduct germ warfare, that's easy. If you teach these people how to defend against it, you know how to do it. So anyhow, as I wrote my book, or as I did the research on defending against germ warfare, I would keep it and put it in a notebook, and I only had a small desk there. When that notebook got full, I'd take it home and throw it in the bottom of the closet. Forget about it. Side note, 1988, down in Houston, Texas, at the Correctional Institute, we had many of the guards' wives, prison guards, and their wives and their children, was coming down with a very strange disease. They sent it to us. We tested it. It was come to find out it was called Mycoplasma fermentis. The bacteria had been manipulated. It had been genetically engineered. They were experimenting on death row inmates. And the guards caught it and spread it around to everybody else. And so I took that, logged it, found out what it was, found out what treated it, logged it into the computer, ran a high-pressure liquid chromatograph on it, and forgot about it. Just let it go. As we got, this operation kept up. During this time, I was training students. I trained a delightful young lady by the name of Mariam Arif. She's Iraqi. Her very close relative used to be the president of Iraq. He was killed in a helicopter crash. There has been a series of coups, which many of her family members have been hanged. And she was in this country because she thought she could be safe to go back into her country. 1990, the Gulf War. When the Gulf War happens, even as the Gulf War was being geared up, those might into her country. 1990. They were only sent out of the United States in the very last days of December of 1990. As they were, the shipments of nutrient broth, shipments of special atomization heads for dispersing biological agents were still being shipped to Iraq. All this material as it went on. The Iraqi, but in 1991, as the Gulf War started, the microbiologists cleared out of the laboratory. And as you go a little bit forward, in March, Cabazon Whack and Hunt, they start the Cabazon Indian Reservation in California. They suddenly found a major biological warfare laboratory out there. It was 20 stories down. It made quite a few of the media, the press and stuff of this nature. Michael Razzillo, who was the head of this operation, was taken before Congress. He gave a sworn deposition, which literally started making trouble in the laboratory. In June of 1991, I got an unusual phone call. It was from the head of the preliminary specialist at Mansfield General Hospital. He said, we got several people up here of a very serious infection. I've never seen anything like it. They're terribly sick. I send blood samples to the laboratories. They can't do anything about it. I know you guys work with some crazy stuff down there. Would you mind coming on up, taking a look at it? What do you need? I said, well, give me 10 cc's of blood from each girl. One girl had scalded skin syndrome. It looked like scalding water had been poured on her. Her skin was literally sloughing off. Another girl had ulcers from one end to the other. I took the blood samples. I didn't figure I'd be able to find a match. Took it back to the lab, spun it down, run a HPLC on it, fed it into the computer, got about my work. Got a match. The 1988 sample that came from Texas, from the Correctional Institute, was a match, and it was called Mycoplasma fermentis incognitus. I knew it was a biological warfare agent. It had been developed as a biological warfare agent. It had been actually grown down in Florida and then shipped to the Middle East. Anyhow, I took it to my section chief, told him about it. We were all excited because we knew it was a confirmed release of a biological agent. All of a sudden, we got a very sharp clamor. Shut up. Drop it. Forget about it. I didn't. I kept pressing. And then I came in on the 1st of August of 1991. The laboratory was gone. They handed me my personal effects in a black plastic bag. And it was shut. It was over. I still had 2 years of my contract, though. And they said, if you keep your mouth shut, you can do whatever you want. You still get paid for 2 years. Good deal. I started back to Ohio State University to take some advanced courses of microbiology. First day, fall quarter, 91, went into advanced microbiology. I looked down one seat from me, and there sat Miriam Arif, one of my former students. We laughed, joked around a little bit, and we've become very close friends. Matter of fact, the clique of other students, microbiologists, we all started running together, we started dining together, we started studying together. Fast forward into 93, Monday after the World Trade Center had been blown up. I got to I had to get early to get a parking spot in the laboratory at the college. When I got to the college, I went to the MedTech building. There's a little coffee shop in the bottom where we all met at. At that morning, the only person there was Miriam Arif. She always before this was clean, well-dressed. This morning, she looked like she hadn't taken a bath in a week. Hair was matted. And she was sitting there, she must have thought that her arrest was imminent. At this point in time, I started talking with her, and this is again the Monday after the World Trade Center had been blown up. I said, hey Mary, you guys blow that building? It was a poor joke, but anyhow, she almost jumped out of her skin and turned white. And she sat there mumbling something, staring into space. Then she said, Larry, you obviously do not realize the threat that germ warfare is, again, the American population. I want you to listen very carefully to what I'm going to tell you the next few minutes. Because you're a dear and trusted friend, and when it comes my time to act, I do not want your death to be on my conscience. Then she said, at this point, she admitted to me that she was heavily involved in the Iraqi government's offensive germ warfare program. What had happened was Iraq does not have any intercontinental ballistic missiles. They do not have aircraft with the range that will reach the American shore. But they have numerous Iraqi students going to college throughout the United States. Miriam said she had been slipping vials of bubonic plague and anthrax into the United States. She had made 6 trips back and forth to Iraq. Every time she comes, she was carrying a vial of either bubonic plague or anthrax in her body cavity, plain and simply. And I asked Miriam, why did you not use something that you can get in the United States here, that you can isolate local? She said simply, in the Quran tells us that you cannot use anything that your enemy has not used against you first. You cannot stab somebody with a dagger that they haven't tried to stab you first. You see, she said, the great irony is the United States sold Saddam Hussein all those vials of anthrax and bubonic plague that the girls are now smuggling back into the United States. I asked her, have you seen the Iraqi domestic germ warfare program? She said, don't be silly. Of course I have. The Iraqi germ warfare program on 2 fronts, foreign and domestic. Domestic being in Iraq. Iraq, they set up chemostats on small airstrips around the country. Chemostats, what you grow germs in. And those chemostats could be brushed off if anybody asked any questions as tanks for holding agricultural chemicals. Short airstrips that a single type of aircraft, a high-wing turboprop, that is used for crop dusting to be kept at each strip. These, again, for agricultural purposes. If they geared up to use germ weapons, It would take them a couple of days to gear them up, to get the chemostats going, to get the everything going. For anthrax, about 2 days. For bubonic plague, about a week to 2 weeks. Iraq also had several missiles armed with anthrax weapons, anthrax warheads. Remember when the Gulf War was going at a very feverish pitch and all of a sudden it stopped? The reason is Saddam Hussein fired a missile into Israel that had a concrete warhead on it. That's all it was a block of concrete. Nothing there. The people ran out, they started checking it. That's concrete. Why on earth would you fire a Stone Age missile? They then stopped at that point. That was the shot fired across the bow. The rockets with the anthrax and the plague were on the launchers. According to the Air Force at this point, they destroyed over 300% of Iraq's missiles. Every time I've ever read, there's only 100% of anything. And so our troops were lying about what was going on. And also, in fact, after the war, we found out we hadn't even destroyed a single missile launcher. At that point, Saddam Hussein still had his full arsenal of biological weapons. At that point, the United States dropped off. When we dropped off, we left as a Republican Guard fully in power. We left, and understand now, for over 20 years, the Muslim Sufis said the great Satan will strike the heel of Allah. When the great Satan strikes the heel of Allah, then a great holy war will go forward. And when this holy war is over, the great Satan will be destroyed, and the Muslim, the Quran, the Holy Quran, will be supreme. The place where Saddam Hussein had his fort was known as the heel of Allah. In January of 91, we struck the heel of Allah and set the timetable ticking down. When it will happen, who knows? But you see, at that point, Iraq did not have biological weapons within the United States. And so what he did, he had these exchange students. They set up what is known as a cell. Each cell contains 11 members, 10 men to act as dispersing agents, 1 woman to act as a courier. And the way it is, when they come into the country, they have used our internet sites to communicate with. They use our universities to meet and plan. They're known as sleeper cells. The FBI calls them sleeper cells. They're there, students going about their business, getting their PhDs, doing their research, until the order comes to attack. When the order comes, I asked Miriam about the World Trade Center, and she said, do you think that we would settle for some silly old building for the million of my people that you have butchered? We will demand 1 American life for every one of our countrymen that you butchered. So basically, what was happening is that these girls were smuggling in vials of bubonic plague. I asked Miriam, how would the attack be carried out? She said it's simple. As the girls smuggle in the little vials is taken and hidden. Anthrax has got a shelf life of approximately 5,000 years. Bubonic plague has got a shelf life of approximately 250 years. That's in the vials, freeze-dried in the vials. And once the attack, they get the order to attack. First off, the girls will take the vials. They will go and take go to the refrigerator, take skim milk, put a half a mil, open a little glass vial with the bubonic plague or the anthrax is in. First off, they start with bubonic plague. And you put in 1/2 milliliter of skim milk and 1/2 milliliter distilled water in the little vial. You'll take a 100 milliliter flask, you put 100 milliliters of water in it. Then you put in the dehydrated nutrient broth powder that can be purchased at there's several companies in the United States that you can purchase this at, no questions asked. You then will take it, put it on the stove and bring it to a boil, then let it cool that you can comfortably touch it to the end of your wrist, just like you do a baby's bottle. You got a little piece of tinfoil over it to keep it sterile. Take the tinfoil off and dump the contents of the little vial into the beaker and put it on a heated shaker table that can be bought for about surplus for about 50 bucks. At this time, word goes out to each of the other agents. Each agent will go out and purchase 3 5-gallon stainless steel pump-up spray cans. He'll also, through aircraft supply houses, order aircraft Venturi. A Venturi is a funnel-shaped device that bolts on the outside of older airplane that provides suction for aircraft instruments. They will also, many of them have been trained to fly Cessna 150 aircraft. The reason they chose the 150, it'll run on car gasoline. It's also easy to fly, and we gave them a couple of dozen of them to train their pilots in. We gave them to Saddam Hussein, so why not train them in it? Many of the agents will go to private airstrips and steal the 150s. Most of the 150s at private airstrips are unguarded. And how they steal it, they were trained in the desert to run up to the aircraft, untie it. Take a screwdriver, pop the door open. Reach in, push the mixture control in, make sure your fuel's turned on. Go around, hand prop the propeller 3 times. Open the right side of the engine cowling, reach in with a pair of wire cutters, and cut the 2 magnetic kill wires. Put her tight, get up front, flip the prop. She's going to fire. Jump back in, throw the coal to her, drop your flaps, lift her off. Fly it to a private strip. Then you go and take recording tape, magnetic recording tape. Grind the recording tape up with a hog grinder into a powder. Mix it with a shellac, and you paint the airplane with it. That magnetic recording tape, when the radar waves strike it, are absorbed into the matrix and are not reflected. The aircraft becomes invisible to radar. We spent several $1 million to build a stealth airplane. If you paint it with recording tape, it disappears also. And so, for 9 days, the broth will incubate in this little vial. Then the girls will take 10 9-milliliter screw-top test tubes and put about 9 milliliters of the plague into each of those test tubes. Put a screw-type cap on it. Tighten the cap, put a string around it. They go in the restroom and slide it up into their body cavity and take it to their site. Miriam said, what are they going to do? Stop every girl walking down the street and see if she's carrying a vial, body cavity? It's not going to happen, plain and simple. Each of the agent will be given words beforehand. They'll take the 3 5-gallon stainless steel tanks and put them on a stove eye. They turn it up and bring it to a boil. You take the center pump out, let it set. You take a pressure cooker, put 3 towels in the pressure cooker, like you used to cooking potatoes in. Bring it to a boil. Take 3 aquarium air stones, put them in the pot, and sterilize it. You'll take the tanks, set them off. Each one's got 4 gallons of broth in it now. Put the aquarium air stone down in it, cover it with a sterile towel. Now let it drop to room temperature. You put a heating towel around the tank, and like you use for your back, these electric heating pads. Bring the temperature of the broth to 35 degrees centigrade, body temperature. The girl shows up. She goes in the restroom, recovers the vial. He opens the vial and dumps a 1/3 into each tank. That's bubonic plague. Now she goes back to her hotel and makes the procedure until she has delivered all 10 vials. Once the 10th vial has been delivered, she gets on an airplane and heads back to the Middle East. Now this will grow inside those containers. The plague will grow into the containers for 9 days. Once the mission starts, you take the air stone out, you take your air pump, put it back in a tank, and tighten the tank. Now, all this time, you're taking tetracycline. In case if you spill any, you're not going to come down with it. The girls, when they're coming into the country, they're taking tetracycline. That way, if a vial had cracked, there's no dangers of the girls getting infected. Remember, you're using it to destroy an infidel. Miriam was telling me that when she was a little girl growing up, going to school, once a month, they would take them to the graveyards. And in certain graveyards, they had loudspeakers, screams and hollers and yells. And the teacher would say, these are people that did not die for Allah. They're tormented in their graves and will be tormented for all time. Then they would take them to a beautiful cemetery with beautiful harp music playing in the background. Ah, these are the beloved martyrs of Allah. They are guaranteed eternal paradise. And remember, every infidel that you kill has to serve you as a slave in your next life. Plain and simple. So once the word comes out, when the morning of the attack comes, the guys will take the tanks. They bolted the Venturi up underneath the car. They got the tank in the car. They pump the tank up and start driving down an interstate around a big city. Make sure you do it upwind so the wind will carry it back over the city. You reach down, open the valve. The air blowing through the car, underneath the car, blows through the Venturi, turns the liquid into a very fine mist, and a fog of death is blowing out behind the car. And Miriam said if you put an extended pipe on it, it looked like a tailpipe. And that way people just think it's exhaust coming out of the car. There's no smell, there's no taste, there is no kaboom. The aircraft crews do the same thing, except they put it in the aircraft, they get rid of the passenger seat, they got the venturi mounted on the right landing gear strut, and that way the slipstream from the propeller will blow it away from the tail, so if you want to land and take off for other missions, you can do it without contaminating the aircraft. Get up early in the morning, they will take off at very early in the morning, just before daylight. That way, all you got to do is put a red light at the end of the field, point the aircraft at it, throw the coal to it, lift the front nose wheel off, get her off the ground, milk up your flaps. Once you've gone to your target, once you get off, you reach over and turn on the VOR. Listen for the high winds aloft. That way you'll know how far upwind and what altitude to lead your target, a major city. Once you get over the city, reach down, open the valve. You got your tanks pumped up. And you start spraying the fog of bubonic plague down over the city. With bubonic plague in the pneumonic form, there's no smell, there's no taste, there's no kaboom. About the third day, you're going to start coughing. As you cough, it spews bubonic plague out into the air. If you came to the hospital at this point, if I gave you enough antibiotics to kill all the plague bacteria in your lungs, you are dead. You are a walking corpse. You are dead. I could kill all the bacteria in your lungs, but it still will release enough enterotoxins. It's going to knock out your liver. It's going to knock out your spleen. It's going to knock out your kidneys. You are dead. But then the better news keeps coming with the anthrax cruise. The anthrax cruise started a few days after the plague cruise. And once the plague crews have released the plague, they go back to the Middle East. Now the anthrax crews start. The anthrax crews start by releasing the anthrax. Anthrax, it takes 2 days for the symptoms to start. Plague, 3 days. So on the second day, you release the anthrax. That way you get a binary. You get what's known as a Russian cocktail. You got plague and anthrax into the area. Plague, once someone starts coughing, you can spread it to anybody else that's breathing. Anthrax, though, you can't spread it between people. Unless the bodies die in place, the corpses remain until they decay. Wind blows the spores back up, and that's the case. Anthrax, when you breathe it in, let's just say, what will the fatalities be? Take a single 3 or 4 gallon container of anthrax. Take a boat and drive up the Hudson River, using nothing more than a commercial paint sprayer to spray it out. Within 48 hours, 400,000 people will be dead. Plain and simple. The plague, once it's sprayed out, within 72 hours, if anybody hasn't caught it, it dies. But it's a friend that keeps on giving. You keep passing it around to each other. Anthrax, on the other hand, has got a longer shelf life, 5,000 years. Once an area has been hit, there is no known method yet to decontaminate that area. There's a Canard Island off the Scottish coast we dropped an anthrax bomb on in 1942. It's 6 acres square, and I've been told flat as a pancake. They've used every known method to mankind to decontaminate that island. It is still uninhabitable to this day. Miriam also told me, she said, Miriam at that time had told me a lot of this, and she was feeling better. She said, Larry, meet me in the main library this afternoon. I'm going to be on the move. I got something to show you. And Miriam, when I met her, she took out a little map that had little blue squares that looked like a road map. It was a nation's power grid. Miriam explained that in the United States, electricity is generated at 12,000 volts. It is boosted to over 100,000 volts for transmission. Each high-voltage step-up transformer is oil-cooled with an oil-cooled radiator sticking out on each side of it. There is no backups. These things are unique. She said the crews has come up, Iraq has come up with a beautiful little goodie that take care of those anthrax, or those high-voltage step-up transformers. She showed me how they go and take a piece of 5/8 all thread, a piece of 3/8 all thread, get a simple little machine lathe and convert it into a tail igniter for a hand grenade. Where they get the hand grenades, they go to Army surplus stores, buy practice grenades. Screw the grenade igniter into the back of the grenade, thread the front of it, where you can put a sharp point into it. They fill it with a double-base shotgun powder or pistol powder, epoxy the threads into place. Take a 2-foot long dowel rod, 3/4 inch dowel rod, They put the grenade into one end. On the other end, they take 2 washers and a rubber gasket. They take a piece of 4-foot-long water pipe, slide the rifle grenade down in it, turn it around, pour in a carefully measured black powder charge, put a dowel rod with 2 O-rings and an electric igniter is slid inside of it. They fill the back of it with oven-baked sea sand, put duct tape on the back of it. There's a rifle-propelled grenade. All the products made right in the United States. Then, all they have to do, once the anthrax crews have released the anthrax, you still got a couple of days before it starts taking effect. All you have to do is go where those high-voltage step-up transformers is. They put it across their shoulder, the rifle grenade, using a simple sight. They put a thumb out, look at the target, close one eye, notice how far the terrain shifted, open that eye and close the other and see how far the terrain has shifted, as if you'd go out there and measure the difference between those 2 shifts. Then multiply it by 9, that's your range. Miriam said that's where you set the rifle grenade sight. Fire the rifle grenade sight into the high voltage step-up transformer, the oil cooler. The oil drains down, the transformer burns up, the power grid starts shutting down. Across the country, the entire nation's power grid can be crippled with nothing more than a homemade rifle-propelled grenade. At this point, Miriam, she said, Larry, I can tell you all this in perfect safety because whoever you tell will not believe you. And those that do believe you already know about it. So plain and simple. And that afternoon, she said, give me a few days, Larry. I'd do the same for you. Give me a few days because I'm going to be on the move now. Before you start making inquiries, I called the FBI. I called the CDC. I called everybody I knew to call. Miriam was right. No one cared. I called the Center of Disease Control and I asked, do you have a contingency plan in case somebody would release biological weapons upon the United States? They said, we do. I said, would you please send me a copy of it? We will. Several days passed, no contingency plan. I called them again. And they said, oh, we'll send a contingency plan to you. They said, and again, nothing happened. Finally, I got the Fort Collins Vector Division. I said, why won't you send me your contingency plan for germ attack? They said, that's national secret. And I said, that's bull, because anything civil defense cannot be made secret. They said, are you aware of the 1972 treaty banning biological weapons? I said, yes. Are you aware of the treaty that we signed back in the early 60s, again, with MAD? Are you familiar with MAD? Mutual Assured Destruction. Which means that we will leave our population open, vulnerable, and naked to an attack. And so that if we are show that we will not be the first that would release nuclear weapons. In 1972, we attached all germ warfare defense to that same treaty. There is no contingency plan. There is none. Absolutely none. I just about flipped. I started raising Cain. He said, well, you're a microbiologist. If you're so concerned about it, why don't you write your own book then? I did. But anyhow, I started making calls, more and more calls. And I went back to my home, and I took the notebooks that I told you about that have been stored in the bottom of my closet. I took all those notebooks. What's in that book right there is the notebooks. It's all the materials from the notebooks. And I thought that people would be jumping up and down glad that I wrote this book. I sent a copy of it to the CDC, Center of Disease Control. And all of a sudden, they got a call back, and they said, what did you use to test your plague with? Did you run antibiotic acceptability screening tests? I said, sure. What did you use for plague? I said, Yersinia intercolitica, same family. Well, that sounds pretty good. Well, what about anthrax? I said, I use a non-virulent form of anthrax. Won't hurt nobody. Fine. They said, well, we think there's a form of plague that comes out of Bombay that maybe you should test it. You're a microbiologist. Here, we'll give you a number that you can call, and you can order the bubonic plague and have it sent to your private lab. I ordered the bubonic plague and had it sent to my house. 2 o'clock in the morning, about 40 federal agents stormed the place. They absolutely tore the place to shreds. And come to find out, they threatened, they accused me of all dastardly deeds there could be. But the thing about it is I'd broken no laws, none whatsoever. And the thing is, they came up with trumped-up charges, a bunch of trumped-up charges. The agreement was if I agreed not to publish that book. all the charges would go away. I fought it for 3.5 years in federal court and finally won. But I tell you what, after that, I started doing some more research. They finally took me in for debriefing. The Pentagon called me in for a debriefing. They said, let's take the man in and debrief. Is he telling the truth? They took me into a secluded location. For 5 hours, I was under the gun. That's where they do the lie detector test, voice stress analysis, and stuff of this nature. After 5 hours of interrogation, the girl working the voice stress analysis had to excuse herself. She had to go puke. She came back white as a ghost. She said, he's telling the truth. We started taking the computer models and modeling what would happen. Miriam said they had 100 cells in the United States. That gives us 1,000 points of release. What would happen, what would be the death toll if they succeeded in their attack? What we did, we started feeding it into the computers, and we started calculating what would be the result of 1,000 points of release of a combination of bubonic plague and anthrax across the United States. The computer model showed that if we knew the day, the hour of the attack, the minute of the attack, and stuff of this nature, we're going to lose 180 million people. If we do not know the day of the attack, but only know the attack has occurred when people started falling dead, we're going to lose 230 million people. Plain and simple. And once I started getting very deep into the investigation, I started to find out why, the question becomes, why would a government permit a country to develop biological weapons? What is the alternative motive? Why would you prevent the public from having knowledge to defend themselves? What I found out has to do with a simple salt. All of this stuff, all this data has to do with a simple salt and the availability of a salt known as potassium phosphate. Potassium phosphate, if you take a bushel of corn, put it in a crucible, heat it white hot, all the gases that come from the atmosphere will volatilize off. The carbon, the nitrogen, the oxygen. In the bottom of that crucible, you got a white powder. That is potassium phosphate. That is in the fertilizers on your field, the #1 ingredient is phosphorus, phosphate. And you see the plants mine that soil. When you take it off the land, they mine the soil. It was found out that back in the late 60s, we started running into a major problem. During World War II, the United States exhausted all domestic forms of potassium phosphate. There is none here. We started using potassium phosphate from down in South America out of Chile, and we exhausted their total supply of phosphate. Then we started putting up satellites, but we knew there was one place that had potassium phosphate that has 99.9% of the world's known supply of phosphate. That is the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea in some places is 500 foot thick of pure potassium phosphate. Potassium is radioactive. If you take a pure bottle of potassium and put a Geiger counter up to it, you'll get a reading. And by putting specialized satellites around the Earth, we mapped the whole Earth hunting for potassium phosphate. We found one small supply in northern Canada. It would last the United States no more than 2 years. We have looked the world over, the little bit of supply in the Caspian Sea. It's a low grade. The Russians are using it right now. In Tibet, China invaded Tibet. Why? Potassium phosphate. Their supplies will be exhausted in the near future. Right now, we get almost 100% of our potassium phosphate from Israel. That is, they only will sell us 1 year supply, no more. This was known in 1946. That is why we threw all effort to get control of the Middle East, of Israel and the Dead Sea in 1947. That is the reason behind the whole thing. But understand now, in the Dead Sea, there is enough potassium phosphate there at current use to last no more than 18 years. If you take our fields, our country, the United States, the population of the world has exceeded its carrying capacity. The carrying capacity of a field or community, let's take a field. If you do not put any fertilizer on that field and stuff of this nature, it will give you about 8% of the yield that you currently get off of it. And if you take a community, you go in there, this happened by missionaries doing it in Africa. We went in there and they said, all these poor people are starving to death. 8 out of 10 children die. And so they brought in antibiotics. They brought in all this stuff. Instead of those 8 children dying, they lived. Now, all of a sudden, the population has got from the 2 replacement to 8. So you got a massive population explosion. They said, fine, putting out enough food. We're going to give them fertilizer. So we fertilized the fields. Productivity went up almost 10 times, 8 to 10 times. Now you got a population skyrocketing, you got a productivity, but the field has got a limit. If you remove the potassium phosphate, it drops down here. The yield of the people is up here. In any ecological community, if you exceed the carrying capacity of the fields, it will collapse. I don't care what you do, it will collapse. We know that under current practices now in Africa, they knew that if they went into the area, they had an overpopulation of African personnel. They needed a method to eliminate the personnel. They tried birth control. Birth control does not work among the African people. Flat out won't do it. They'll tell you what to do with your condoms real quick. So what they did, we took a sheep virus and another virus that causes a form of lymphoma in people, and it is a form of cancer. We genetically engineered it in 1975, and it's what you call AIDS today. We took the AIDS virus, and what we have to do, AIDS is a race-specific organism. It is designed to exterminate one race over another race. And what we had to do is find some way that one race had something that another race didn't have. That is an intermediate bacterial carrier. We started checking the blacks, the whites, and all this stuff. Come to find out the black females have the normal vaginal flora is lactobacillus. All females it is, lactobacillus. But they have a motile lactobacillus. The whites have a non-motile lactobacillus. So you take the AIDS and you put a special protein that it will latch onto, and so the chances of a white woman getting AIDS from an AIDS-infected male is the same as getting pregnant, only 2 days out of the month. The chances of a black female getting AIDS, of an AIDS-infected male, is almost 100%, because her lactobacillus becomes infected. It sits there and waits for the cervix to open. As soon as the cervix opens, it swims right up into the abdomen. Bang, she's got it. Anybody she has intercourse with it, it is like a motile bacteria, like syphilis. It'll swim right up the penis, right up the urethra. Bang, it's infected. Right now, the program has been very successful. They have eliminated almost 100 million people. The studies that was just recently done in Africa, we found out that a full 80% of the population have now got AIDS. Millions of people are dying en masse. The thing about it is, they also realized the problem with the potassium phosphate. The limitations of potassium phosphate. What I am showing you here today is both sides of the coin. One side of the coin is germ warfare. The other side of the coin is why do they develop germ warfare. They have got other genetic, with the AIDS virus. The AIDS, the only way that it jumped into the Caucasians is by anal sex, through the gays and stuff of this nature. That is how it was spread into the Caucasian area. It is also spread into the Chinese essentially the same way. And right now, as the AIDS blossoms through Africa, areas that we flew over 5 years ago that was in heavy cultivation has now been reduced to vegetation. A friend of mine was in South Africa last fall. He said that one village that he was in 5 years ago, that during market day you just barely could walk right down the little line. That's it. He went back there this time and there was 2 little shops open. He said, where's all the people? They're all dead. There's 2 groups of people. The very old, too old to have sex, and the very young, too young to have sex. And the entire middle group is gone. So that is that side of the coin. The problem with biological weapons proliferating, the head of the New York Times, scientific investigator, Bill Braw, he interviewed me, then he went and interviewed the past president of the American Society of Microbiology. He said, ask him, why did you sell Saddam Hussein anthrax? Yeah, most definitely. Did you sell him bubonic plague? Yeah, we sold him bubonic plague, yeah. Why? I believe in positive birth control. Plain and simply, positive birth control. At this point in time, I knew that in my efforts, everything that I do, I feel in one way responsible for this, even though I was working for a corporation and helping train the Iraqis to begin with. But the Iraqis are only one little facet of this. The other facet that has to be dealt with is the powers to be and the people in power. But again, put yourself in their position. One, we have maybe 18 more years supply of potassium phosphate, and that's it. If it runs out, you have mass starvation everywhere. You have a complete collapse, a massive collapse. On the other hand, you got useless eaters, people's consuming resources that are providing nothing. The rainforests are being burned down, wasted. The trouble is, all the potassium phosphate in the rainforest is in the biomass. If you burn it down, the soil is in the wrong ionized form. It can't hold the potassium phosphate. It washes away. So you got a couple years of crops, but after that, the land is worthless for hundreds of years. Now, the people that's burning down these forests in order to survive, are they rocket scientists? Are they people contributing a mass thing to the people, to mankind? No. They are consuming. So from their point of view, I'm giving the point of view of the other side of the coin. Right now, we've tried birth control. It doesn't work. They have permitted very strong sexual promiscuity at Ohio State University this last fall. We were checking all incoming freshmen. We found out that 85% of the incoming freshman girl had chlamydia. We found out over 300 cases of syphilis, over 300 or 400 cases of gonorrhea. With chlamydia, there is no symptoms to begin with until you get pelvic inflammatory disease, but just about every girl that's got chlamydia is going to be sterile, plain and simple. So you are permitting disease to spread on its own. Again, germ warfare. We didn't introduce it. They're just make the culture to make a very promiscuity to permit it to spread. The only thing that we can do now as a people is, one, learn how to defend against germ warfare. Whether the germs are released purely as an accident, plainly as an accident. We had a near miss 2 years ago, a very near miss. In the United States, back in the 70s, or 60s, we started a massive rat eradication program to get rid of the rats. We put out heparin in the rat poison to get rid of the rats. In Europe, when the bubonic plague swept through Europe, only one species of rat, the European black rat, would live long enough to spread the plague to the fleas and the fleas to people. Okay? It still wiped out 3/4 of Europe. The United States has a Norwegian brown rat, or black rat. We have the Norwegian rat. We took, in 1950s, 100 rats from each American city, injected them under controlled in the laboratory with bubonic plague. All died before they got to the infectious stage where they could pass it on to the fleas and the fleas on the people. So you couldn't get a runaway bubonic plague in the United States like you did in Europe. But we put out all this rat poison. Some of the rats were resistant to the rat poison. The others who weren't resistant died off. The ones that were resistant survived, and their progeny survived. 2 years ago, they took 100 rats from each city, and 85% got to the infectious stage before they died. 1% of the European black rats, and it decimated 3/4 of Europe. In Columbus, Ohio, we had a rare pet shop. We went down there and we found a pet store owner dead of bubonic plague. His brother lived out in Five Points area of Mexico. He was setting catch-alive traps, catching gerbils. They also carried bubonic plague. He was dead in his trailer. If those rats or those gerbils had got into the sewers and got introduced into the rats. But what would happen if an Iraqi ticked off family? Why should he be ticked off? The only thing we did is bomb his house, murder his family, kill his people, starve his people to death. Why should an Iraqi be upset? And if an Iraqi had a plague, a bubonic plague, a vial, or a little vial of anthrax, why would it entice him to spread it among the people that murdered his family? Plain and simple. I mean, what would possibly entice him? Or if he just takes little bags of cornmeal, little cloth bags of cornmeal, and then started damping it, and then injecting bubonic plague into it, and going around and tossing it down the sewers in a city. That is how easy. If you took everybody in this room and they decided to build an atomic bomb, the chances of getting hold of the fissionables, being able to do it for all practical purposes, is non-existent. No other country on earth has done it to date. Plain and simple. If you don't have the infrastructure to refine the uranium and plutonium, nobody else has done it. What about bubonic plague? To see how long it would take us to recover anthrax a few years ago, we started off on a tour to find some anthrax. The only thing we did, we went to the newspapers. We did a search when they had the last outbreak of anthrax in our area. We found out it was during the 50s. We went and talked to the microbiologist in charge. What did you do with the corpses, the cows that died of anthrax? Did you burn them? No, he said we didn't burn them. Did you put it in lime pits? No, we didn't put it in lime pits. What'd you do with them? He said, come here, I'll show you. We went out in the country and he said, do you see those mounds over in the woods there? I said, yeah. That's where we put the cows which died of bubonic plague, or anthrax. We went back to the laboratory, got 5 vials of ethyl alcohol. We took a tile probe, which is a 6-foot long steel probe with a T-handle on top, and started probing down where the cows were. They felt it get soft, reached up and washed the tip off the probe. The vegetative cells will die in the alcohol. The spores will remain alive. Went back to the laboratory, ran it through a membrane filter with a little water, put it on some nutrient broth, and guess what? Out of 10 things, we had 6 positive for anthrax. With that culture of anthrax, a person could take nothing more than beef stew, cool it, put it in a tank, aerate it, pour the anthrax in. Now, let's say you got nothing better to do than a pump-up sprayer, pump it up, go down a steady street with it stuck out the window. Within 48 hours, up to 50,000 people will be dead, plain and simply. Understand the greatest threat that faces us today, the same thing with bubonic plague. How long do you think it took us to get bubonic plague from nature? One of the group at the laboratory went out to the 5 Points area. They started setting catch-alive traps, the little gerbils, above 5,000 foot mark. For some reason, plague likes altitude. They caught a half a dozen rats, put it in a little, what they call a rat trap. There's a little pipe with a screen on the end that comes down over their tail so they don't reach around and bite you when you take a drop of blood out of their tail. Take it and streaked it out on the media. Within 10 days of starting the project, we had a culture of bubonic plague from nature. In other words, we're not going to a factory. We're not going some place that can be controlled. We're going out in nature. We have trained several hundred microbiologists how to deal in germ warfare. I did a program recently with Diane Sawyers on Prime. My Soviet counterpart was on there with me. He used to head the Soviet Germ Warfare program. And talking about the Germ Warfare program, he said that we had over 50,000 microbiologists in Russia trained in germ warfare. Almost 50,000 have now left the Soviet Union. They registered in Geneva under the International Mercenary Act. They're now working for countries around the world as mercenaries. They also took samples with them. They knew they took cultures with it. Now, how easy is it to take a culture of anthrax? Give you an idea, you could take a button and hollow it out and put a drop in there, a microdot. Give you an idea how lethal is anthrax. 1/10 of 1/1,000,000th of a gram is fatal. 10 or 30 grams could exterminate the entire population of the United States. We have ticked off the world. And also the people in the power, the inner circle, the Illuminati, if you would. They also realize on their side of the table, we're running out of potash. If you started a crash program right now where you started recovering all human waste, all sewage, all stuff of this nature, and still trying to recycle it, if everybody did it, then we could avert the disaster and use the potash would only be released through international people, the people which actually run out of potash, and very carefully do it. But the chances of that happening are non-existent. If you cannot get the natives to use condoms, how are you going to get them to do total recycling, get back in harmony with nature? It's not going to happen. On their side of the coin, the only thing that can save this planet, the only thing can save us, is a reduction of 90% of the population of the planet. There's only one way to do that. That is through the use of biological weapons. Even a biological weapon can be considered if you know that these girls are spreading chlamydia, if you make them very sexually promiscuous and they're spreading it all over the place, it's a form of germ warfare. If you know that you can teach people how to defend themselves, that's germ warfare. The elite of this country are protecting themselves against germ weapons. They have developing, right now, to give you an idea, in New York City, the last study done by FEMA, if a single vial the size of a light bulb was dropped in a subway, within 72 hours, over 50,000 people will be dead. It would exhaust this nation's entire supply of antibiotics. In one city, like New York, gets hit, the entire supply of antibiotics in the country is exhausted, completely exhausted, leaving nothing for anybody else. What you have to do at this point in time, it's not just me saying it. It is not me at all saying it. The leading scientists, I got article after article after article here from the leading scientists around the world. Again, there is no, when I'm talking to other microbiologists about the problems of germ warfare, I'm preaching to the choir. They know about it. The only thing that we can do is the same. Who do you want to be in control of your planet? Do you want those which are spiritually dead? Or do you want a spiritual group of people to control the planet? The die-off is coming. Nothing can stop that now. We are already, there is a thing known as critical mass in fission. There's also critical mass in population. If a person has a cold and walks into a gymnasium and sneezes and nobody else is there, it's not going to be transmitted. Another person gets there, the odds going up. The more you spec the gymnasium, till finally it's going to be a herd, it's going to spread through everybody. Right now, our sanitation systems are collapsing. Our food that we eat are wrecking our immune systems. We are now getting closer and closer to that point when you have an outbreak. We had a close call last fall in New York City. They brought some birds in. Half the animals in the Bronx Zoo died, but then it got out. Then you started having other birds die and other people die. If they told you the exact number that died, it would send everybody into a panic. It's plain and simple. It is not a question with germ weapons. All of the top people in the nation tell you exactly the same thing. It's not a question of if we're going to get hit with a biological weapon. It's merely when we get hit. And the biggest danger is they're scared to death of right now is going after the wrong trigger puller. They call it, the technical name is a trigger puller. We know that North Korea has a very highly advanced germ warfare program. We know that Iraq has. We know that China has. Let's say that North Korea wants to take over South Korea. So they send a couple agents into the United States and release anthrax into New York and make it look like the Iraqis did it. We attack the Iraqis massively. Other Iraqi cells in the United States release. And then you got a massive kill-off when the very people that did it on another side of the world are advancing south to take over another country. Same thing with China wanting Taiwan. In other words, they release a biological weapon somewhere. People start dying off. We point the wrong finger. And they come in and take Taiwan while the United States is over here cleaning up the corpses. From that point on, I wanted today to bring forward to you both sides of the coin. The side of the coin of seeing, why would somebody let germ weapons proliferate around the world? You simply know that we're out of potash. We're running out. It's like an hourglass, and the sand in the hourglass is potash. On the other hand, the people out here that need to know the message, unless you are part of the elite, you're not going to be told the message. Plain and simple. It is their advantage that you cease to exist. It is that simple. With that in mind, I turn it over to my counterpart here. We have gone through extensive programs that come up with antibiotics that people can purchase in large quantities, decontamination fluids that can be used to decontaminate your home with, very effective decontamination fluids. When talking with my Russian counterpart, I asked him, in the Soviet Union, what did you guys ever come up with to decontaminate your tanks and your aircraft and trucks? The same thing that we've come up with. It's the same thing. With that.
Thank you, Larry. Now that every hair on your body is standing up and you're all having attention, I get to do the fun thing and bring up the solutions. I have the same type of background that Larry does. I grew up in the military. I graduated from a high school in Wiesbaden, Germany. I spent 5 years in Madrid, Spain. And because of my father being in the Air Force and being involved in two of the most critical wars, I was part of it whether I wanted to be or not. And so by, you might call it osmosis, I was put into the world and received I guess a spirit or an attitude that gave a universality to our mission statement. After you have been in Europe and been part of projects in Europe, you never look at the United States quite the same, even though it's your home and your heart and soul is here and the place you want to protect is here. As a naturopathic physician, I learned a lot of what I have done in Siberia. I did 2 projects as a water specialist in Zapsib, which is a steel mill in Siberia, and through that I learned a lot about what goes on in those rainforests and what goes on with the needs of the people there. I also worked in Chernobyl. I worked with an Amsterdam doctor who could basically filter out the alpha and beta radiation, and through him I learned that if you put a map up, and Larry also mentioned this, you can actually draw circles around different geographical locations with different water tables. And you can assign different disease patterns to those water tables. And they aren't all areas that a dead cow with plague has been buried in. Okay, there are so many more different toxins and pesticides and you know, just the outgassing of things. And I learned that through 15 years of my practice, which is in San Clemente, California. If we didn't address the water problem, we could band-aid them to get well, but they would never stay well. And so I began really researching and trying to understand how water acts as a mechanism for both germ warfare and our disease patterns that we have, whether it's a leukemia, whether it's a birth defect that seems to be prevalent in a certain area. The water is something that we really need to address and call our attention to. And my education and training ground, again, came from working in Siberia. I was called over there because most of the people were sick and were working an average of 2 days a week. That's all these people could get to work. And they didn't live very long. We went in and, of course, evaluated their water. One of the things that I noticed is I asked them to take me to the tributary. I cut all of the lead pipes and I did evaluations of what they were using to move their water around. But basically there are some common sense things that occurred to me I asked them to take me to the tributary so I could see where they pulled their water in and what that source was, and then we ran a lot of testing on that water. What was interesting was that they ran their water in, and then the first place it hit was in their hospital with their kidney dialysis, with whatever. And the mechanism that they were using to filter their water with was a sand trap. That's what they had. After it went through the hospital, the second place was to their apartments, and then the third place, without being filtered, was their food processing. They had a little hen house, and they processed their chickens and their eggs and everything right off of that water. And as I stood there trying to make sense of that, and I looked upstream, there was this mass of white, bubbling mass on top. And I said, "What is that?" And they finally admitted to me, we got in the bus through a translator, I found out what that was. It was their sewage. And about, 50 kilometers upstream, they deposited their sewage. Now I was with some very well-qualified engineers and PhDs who we were teaching to use the proper nanometers in a quartz sleeve and run their water over ultraviolet light, which would create an ozone and neutralize a lot of the bacteria. We basically went over to set up a joint venture to teach them to do that and create their own filtration to use for potable water. But they didn't remember me for that, okay? They remembered me and thought I was such a genius because I said, "I know, let's take your sewer and move it 50 kilometers downstream." They thought I was a hero, okay? That's all. And it's just, the lesson to me was that what we do, above all else, no matter what we've engineered and what chemicals and what chemistry and technology we have, if it's not applied with common sense, it's not going to work. And if we don't carry it through, we can have the best engineered tactics and preventative